capital cost, and those turbines, if you build them cheaply, like a lot of people do, they spin at very high velocities, and maintenance on them can be pretty high. Replacing a turbocharger is a pretty major expense on it.
I was gonna ask about the efficiency, like, yeah.
Yeah, so you get a boost in efficiency, you get a especially large boost in power, and a large, somewhat smaller boost in efficiency.
So on these graphs, when you say like Europe, is that cars that are manufactured in Europe? So like me buying a
Right.
Volkswagen?
Right.
Probably,
But they're also, but most of the European cars are cars that are manufactured for Europe. They don't necessarily. I guess that's cars that are manufactured to be sold in Europe. So, so European market. Now to your homework. So the first part of your homework is just stepping through this, and so let's step through it together. So, so everybody that's been through thermodynamics has had a chance, I expect, maybe not, to calculate the efficiency, the thermal efficiencies of an ideal cycle. So what do you do if you have a real engine instead of an ideal engine? So probably, I don't know if you ever looked at a real engine. So we're going to step through. This is a fairly simple but somewhat realistic gas or natural gas turbine example here. So in the case of a natural gas turbine, we have a compressor. We compress the air, and then we go through a regenerator. I'll come to that in just a moment. For now, it's just a heat exchanger. So we compress both the air and the natural gas, typically to somewhere between 30 and 45 bar, depending on the engine. And then you burn the natural gas, and the natural gas goes through a turbine, and the exhaust comes back here. And the idea of the regenerator is, in a natural gas turbine, we've expanded this so the velocity is very low again. It's not like a jet engine where we only expand it partway. Here the velocity is very low, but it's still hot. And that heat represents a source of energy that you'd like to capture in this engine. So by going through this regenerator, which is just a heat exchanger, you cool the exhaust of the, you cool the exhaust by heating the air as it comes in. And since the air has already been compressed, then that's heat that just goes into generating more power, but more energy out of your turbine. Then you cool that back down, and a very common thing to do with turbine analyses is, even though in reality you're pulling air in and you're exhausting this to the atmosphere, they do a closed loop analysis. And in addition to that, if you're willing to assume that the heat capacities of everything are the same, this analysis can get really simple. So everybody understands the diagram?
Why do they assume it's closed loop?
I'll show you in just a minute how, because this can make the analysis pretty simple. Well, first of all, if you calculate the amount of fuel that goes in here, the mass of fuel in this stream, the mass of material in this stream that originates as fuel for a typical turbine engine is like 3%. So, so the fact that you're adding fuel here is a relatively small perturbation on the other analysis. You can't ignore the energy that you have here, but if you just say, we're just going to heat this up and pretend like we just heated it up with no fuel, then that's a pretty close approximation to what happened. So people refer to what I'm about to explain to you as the air standard cycle. And that is, we're just going to pretend that this is all air, all the way through here, and that the heat capacity is constant. And if we do that, then the analysis gets especially straightforward. So for your homework, all I want you to do is step through this so that you understand it. But we'll step through it quickly here, and then you go through it and reproduce it, but all the answers are here already. So to do this analysis, what we want to do is know what the overall efficiency is, which is the amount of work that the compressor does, plus the amount of work that the turbine does. The represent those have opposite signs, right? So depending on what sign convention, whatever sign convention you choose, one of them is going to be positive and the other one is going to be negative. And you divide that by the total amount of heat. So let's start at the beginning. So we're going to start with air, and we say what we need to know is the isentropic temperature of what's going to come out of this compressor. And so thermodynamics tells you that the isentropic temperature out is equal to the temperature in times the pressure ratio raised to the power of gamma minus 1 over gamma, where gamma is C sub E over C sub B. Does that look familiar to most of you from thermodynamics? All right. that tells us what the temperature would be coming out of the system if it was 100%, if the compressor were 100% efficient. But the compressor is not 100% efficient. So, so we calculate the compressor efficiency. The compressor efficiency is the change in enthalpy, the actual change in enthalpy, I'm sorry, the isotropic change in enthalpy over the actual change in enthalpy. And those entropy changes are given by this. But if we're assuming that the heat capacities are constant, and in this case the mass flow rate is going to be the same in and out, we can cancel those two terms, and the compressor efficiency then just becomes this ratio of temperature differences, and you can solve that for T2. So solving this expression for T2 says that T2 is going to equal T1 plus T2 isentropic minus T1 over the compressor efficiency. And compressor efficiencies, by the way, anybody know what a world-class natural gas compressor efficiency should be? Compressor efficiencies higher or lower than, for example, liquid pump efficiencies?
Lower.
Lower, all right, because gases are harder to compress. And kind of off-the-shelf, routine, relatively modestly engineered compressors have efficiencies in the 70% range. But a well-engineered, large-scale natural gas compressor, GE warranties compressors with efficiencies of 92%, a little over 92%. That's an impressive compressor. So that's a really high efficiency. So by contrast, a pump will have a well-engineered, large-scale pump might have an efficiency of 96, 97%. So the compressor efficiencies are given in your homework assignment, but you can see how you can calculate the outlet temperature from that, right? So now we know T2, then we need to figure out T5. So if we know this temperature, T5 in terms of T4, so we go through a similar analysis, and T5 is going through a turbine expander now. So instead of being divided by the efficiency, it's multiplied by the efficiency. Turbine expander efficiencies are, so for steam turbines in power plants, they typically are 97%. For routine turbines and other things, they're lower than that. So these are good kind of just, back of envelope things to know if you're an engineer, what those numbers should look like. And so, let's see, the turbine efficiency is going to approximately be equal to this. So ideally, T6 should be equal to T2. That is, if this is a perfect heat exchanger, this turbine efficiency should not be turbine, that should be regenerator efficiency. The subscript is wrong there. So in the regenerator and the heat exchanger efficiency, if I had a perfect heat exchanger, then that outlet temperature, would be the same in the counter-current heat exchanger as this inlet temperature and vice versa, right? We would have perfect heat exchange moving across there. So if you know the efficiency of your heat exchanger, then, so ideally this would be true, but if you actually know here, we got it right here, the regenerator efficiency, this should be regenerated. You can calculate T3 based on the regenerator temperature, and so now you have everything you need to know. So if you do this calculation, then the enthalpy change through the turbine is going to be C sub P times the difference in the temperatures across the turbine. For the compressor, it's going to be C sub P times the difference in temperatures over there. The total amount of heat that you put into the system is going to be C sub P times the difference in the temperatures of T4 and T2. This is the amount that you put through the burner and the regenerator minus the amount from the regenerator, and so the overall efficiency just ends up being this function of temperatures. And to get T2 and to get T5, you have to know the efficiencies. So T2 and T5 are given by these expressions here. Does that all make some sense to you? So if you wanted to do this more rigorously, you would not cancel, you would recognize the heat capacities are going to be different in the incoming and outgoing streams. So you wouldn't get as simple of expression for T5, but we still have these heat capacities. intervals of the heat capacity system.
So if we're finding all these temperatures, will that mean we have the efficiencies of like the compression?
Right, so if you know the efficiency of the compressor and the efficiency of the turbine and the efficiency of the regenerator, then you can, using this air standard cycle, you can calculate the overall efficiency of this regenerated process. And then to calculate the work, the amount of work that you do per unit energy, you just use that overall efficiency times the heat of combustion and the mass flow rate of what you're putting in. And that will tell you how much work this system can do. All right, so for your homework, for this part of your homework, you're going to just step through this with some real numbers. We'll just work it through. Everything's already worked out here. Just work through it.
Is this slide on Learning Suite?
It is. So this is at the end of the engines.
Is it new?
It's not new. By my thing up here, it's slide number 50 in the engines, and so the internal combustion and turbine engines slide 10. It's about 3 or 4 from the end.
Okay.
You got it?
Yep.
Which reminds me, so at least one student has had some problems with these equations showing up properly on your computer. Some specifically superscripts being turned into.
Yeah, so I've experienced that too on a Mac. If you
Is it a
open it,
Macintosh
does
issue?
well, I think I have a Mac and it does that. But if you put it on a Google Drive and then view it, then it works.
All right, so I was hoping somebody figured out a way to. I can turn these all into PDFs, but that makes them. Would you rather have them be PDFs, or they're? I think they're actually easier to use as PowerPoint slides. Much easier.
Well, we just access Citrix PowerPoint.
And it works on the PowerPoint.
Yeah, it's a Mac issue.
All right. Okay, so you feel like you're ready for your homework? So that's one homework slide. The other homework assignment, there's just a document for you to read. I'm not too sure if Greg's going to talk about it. Crickenden term, but that's part of what you're going to do around your homework, but it's all explained in this short document for you to read on.
Yeah, so in this case, we know the pressure ratio, so we're assuming it's pressurizing up to that pressure in the compressor and then the exact same pressure reduction for the turbine.
Yeah, so, well, yes. So the only pressure changes are across these two devices, so they're linked together. That's part of this air standard cycle that is used for analyzing these kinds of things. So the analysis, that's a fairly, I mean, this is a reasonably sophisticated analysis and actually comes out to be pretty simple if you make these kind of engineering. So if you wanted to do this more rigorously, somebody tell me where would you do that? What is this delta H really? So it's really the integral of m dot c sub p dt, right? So you put an integral in there and you get a 5th or 7th order polynomial for c sub p. So if you want to make it hard, it's pretty easy to do. But, but this is a pretty good analysis actually. This gives you all of the insight with a 10th of the effort in terms of figuring out what's going on in this engine. So one more hand. All right. So I'll introduce Greg, come on up and swap here. So the natural gas, the Gas Processors Association has for a long time been offering fellowships and scholarships. He'll tell you a little bit about that and about natural gas processing. Most of you are in a separations class, and don't know if this is widely known in the gas processing. So natural gas processing goes through a series of distillation steps. One of them is the separation of CO2 from ethane, and that's by far the largest use. CO2 and ethane form an azeotrope, and that's the largest application of azeotropic distillation in the world. Is separation of CO2 from ethane in natural gas processing. Oil refinery, that first column that we talked about, is the largest use of distillation, but it's followed by the first step in natural gas processing, which is demethanation, so separating the methane from everything else. And so this is a major application of distillation in particular and separations in general. And the whole industry is a pretty fascinating industry. So bring that over to you.
Okay. So, my name's Greg Hatch. Is everybody here going for a chemical engineering degree? Is that, and anybody going for a different engineering degree? Okay. So I graduated from BYU with a bachelor's degree in chemical engineering in 2005. I don't think they had an energy engineering class at the time. I did have Dr. Baxter for fluids, though, so we had a...
That was brutal. Tell them how.
Oh, I survived, and I was better for it. So, maybe just a little bit of background. You might find it interesting. Not that I've had a particularly interesting career, but just, you're all going to be looking for jobs probably in the next couple of years. So, Celanese Chemicals recruited pretty heavily at BYU while I was here, and I, for whatever reason, was kind of attracted to them. I took a job right out of school working for Celanese. I went to a chemical plant in Texas. It was their Pampa, Texas plant. Pampa is a really small town in Texas. Excuse me. I was married, got married about a year before I graduated. We had a kid. We thought it would be fun to move away from Utah, where we were both from. So followed that job with Celanese, and I've been there just a few months, and they announced that they were going to shut that plant down. Celanese at the time, and I haven't followed them much since, but they were shutting down 1 or 2 plants in the U.S. and building plants in Singapore and China. Excuse me. To make the same products, and so a lot of their employees sort of didn't like that, and for me at the time, after living there for about 6 months, my wife and I decided, this is a good opportunity for us to get back home. So I started looking for jobs, pretty soon after I graduated. I started looking for jobs back in Utah. Celanese had told me when that plant shut down, I could transfer to a different plant. They had several other plants in Texas, but I decided to look for other opportunities. Excuse me. So I was a process engineer for them, which I enjoyed a lot. Again, in the chemicals business, making acetic acid, acetic anhydride. And then I got a job, at the time it was for Questar. The company was Questar Gas Management, and that was in Salt Lake City, Utah. I grew up in Payson, so I thought, okay, this would be great, getting in the natural gas industry. Went to work for Questar in 2005. I actually just hit my 10-year anniversary with the company a couple weeks ago. Questar in 2010, they divided into 2 different companies. The regulated and the non-regulated companies split. So what you know is Questar, which is the Questar Gas, who I don't know if you pay utilities, but if you do, you pay your gas bill to Questar Gas. Well, I never worked for them. I worked for a non-regulated company that Questar owned, and we were a midstream company, so we processed, compressed, moved gas from wellhead to interstate pipeline. So that happened in 2010. I was no longer with Questar Gas Management. We became QEP Resources, and within QEP Resources, the company I worked for was QEP Field Services. And then in 2014, there was an activist investor group who forced QEP, against their will basically, to separate and sell off their midstream company. And so that was me and my coworkers. We got sold off, and Tesoro bought us. So Tesoro Corporation, you might know them because you see their gas stations. Tesoro also has a midstream company that they already had, but their midstream company was more in the oil business, so gathering oil. And they had wanted to get into the natural gas midstream business, so they bought QEP Field Services. That happened at the end of 2014. So now I work for Tesoro Logistics. That's been about a year and a half. And back about 4 years ago, I sort of left the engineering world and took a job within the company in business development. And so that's what I was doing when Tesoro bought us. And Tesoro, they sort of wanted to not just leave everybody in the silo they were in, they wanted people to sort of cross-train. And so they asked me to move to the oil gathering business. So that's what I've been doing now for about the past year. So I don't even work in natural gas anymore, technically, Dr. Baxter, but
Yeah.
hopefully I can still provide some good information for you. So, excuse me, about, I don't know, 5, 6, 7 years ago, a friend of mine who I've done some work with, he worked for an engineering firm who did some projects for me, and he was part of this Gas Processors Association Scholarship Committee. He was the chair of that committee, and he said they had a really hard time finding somebody to represent them at the University of Utah, and asked if I'd be interested, and I volunteered to do that. And I asked him why they didn't come to BYU as well, and he said, I don't know, we just don't. So I contacted BYU, asked if we could come representing the Gas Processors Association, and have BYU students apply for the scholarship. And BYU students have done really well over the last 5 or 6 years. In fact, there's a new scholarship committee chair this year, and he asked me, he wanted to have a phone call to ask me my secrets of how I get so many applications and such good applications. Because BYU, out of the schools, I can't remember if I have a list of the schools that compete for the scholarship that we go to. They're mostly in the Denver area. Excuse me, so the Colorado School of Mines, University of Colorado Boulder, Colorado State, University of Wyoming. Anyway, BYU students have done quite well in the past several years. And so for the past few years, it's been me coming to Dr. Baxter's energy engineering class. And so I'm hoping that I get to come back in a month or two and present a few scholarship checks. So, so I do have one of those handouts that you got. It's a letter about the scholarship, that's a smaller packet, and then the application, the scholarship application is attached. It's not too much work, hopefully. There is an essay, so I mean, it will take you at least a few hours to fill this out. But I strongly encourage you to do this. We don't get tons of applications. Maybe guessing, last year we probably got between 40 and 50 applications total. And of those, I can't remember, we probably awarded 12 to 15 scholarships. The maximum last year was $3,000, most of them were about $1,500. So you've got a good chance, not that it's a guarantee by any means, but if all of you apply for the scholarship, I'm pretty confident that a few of you are going to get a scholarship from the Gas Processors Association. So, yeah, go ahead.
Is it only for people who plan on going into the natural gas industry?
So that's the purpose of the scholarship,
Yeah.
is to educate students about our industry and to get them interested in it. So we want to award these scholarships to people who have a strong interest in our industry. If you end up doing something else, we're never going to know, and we're not going to come and ask for our money back. But a couple of years ago, it was actually a BYU student. He had put in his application, in his essay, he was talking about medical school, and he was a really strong applicant otherwise, but so there's a committee of us, there's 5 or 6 of us who go through these applications and score you, rank you against each other, and award these. And we're not going to give one to somebody who knows that they're not interested in this industry.
Yeah.
So if that answers your question, if you're interested in our industry, and I hope most of you are, that at least this is one of the options you're considering, then you're a good applicant. There are a few other requirements there. I think they're listed in that letter. Like you have to have at least a 2.8 GPA. You have to be a U.S. citizen. There's a few other things. So I'll talk a little bit about the scholarship, but also I'm here just to talk about the industry and answer your questions. Hopefully give you a feel for what a career in this industry would be like. I've been doing this for 10 years. I can provide some insight to you.
So for a senior, do you have to be planning on grad school to take a scholarship?
No, you don't need to be planning on grad school. I think you have to be a junior or a senior is one of the requirements. It's not for freshmen or sophomores, but it's regardless of your interest in graduate school. Probably most people who get this scholarship would not be going on to graduate school. But you could be, that's fine as well. Okay, how much has Dr. Baxter talked about natural gas so far in this class? Has it been a major, have you had a day where you've been lectured on specifically natural gas or
This
sort
is
of
our
just-
first day specific to natural gas. We talked about it in the context of all the other
Okay.
interviews things.
Okay, perfect. So I didn't know much at all about natural gas when I graduated in 2005. What I've seen in years past when I've come to this class, I always think, man, Dr. Baxter must have already covered everything because the students already know so much, way more than I knew when I graduated. But natural gas, you know, some of its big advantages are that it's clean burning, and I've got some numbers on the next slide to show that. Availability, we have an abundance of natural gas in the United States. People in the industry, we say we have too much. We overproduced in the last few years, and we sort of shot ourselves in the foot. Commodity prices are down, so natural gas, in my opinion, not in my siblings and in-laws' opinion, but in my opinion, it's very, very cheap right now. Disadvantages to natural gas, since it is a gas, there's some issues with transportation and storage that you don't have with liquids. Here's a slide that I grabbed from the EIA website. This is 1998, but hopefully it's still pretty accurate. So natural gas, you know, per BTU compared to oil and coal, you have lower carbon dioxide, but a lot of the bigger benefits are in kind of the particulates, nitrous oxide, sulfur dioxide, particulates. It's a lot cleaner than other sources of fuel. You'll hear the term of bridge fuel, so sort of in the political debates that have been happening, and there's a big push to go from coal and oil to renewable energy. And so a lot of people have said, well, natural gas is a good bridge fuel. It's a lot cleaner than coal and oil, and so it can bridge the gap sort of between those dirtier fossil fuels until we get to where a lot more of our demand can be met by renewables. So GPA stands for Gas Processors Association. Again, that's what I'm technically representing here today. So our business, you have wells, so companies, exploration and production companies drill for oil and gas, right? And there's a lot that goes into that, and that's not something I'm very familiar with. We always take it from after they get it out of the ground. But from where they get gas out of the ground, there's people who work for interstate pipeline companies who would be offended by this. Really to here is our industry, is the midstream business. So the upstream, of course, is drilling, and there's a lot that goes into that. Some of you might have careers in that industry. We take it from there, and there's a lot that happens in the midstream business where you can apply the things that you learn in this degree. So it's a very good fit for chemical engineers to work in the midstream business. So here's a little bit bigger view of that. So you have the wellhead, and then I would say, again, this was a slide I took from a GPA presentation that they put together for people to come to colleges and solicit scholarship applications. I would say that they're missing some stuff too. You don't go straight from the well usually to the gas plant. Usually there's some field compression, field dehydration. We build gathering systems, so one gas plant, it may have hundreds of wells that all come together in a gathering system. There's a lot of fluid dynamics and modeling that we do as a part of that. We model the system to say, hey, the newer wells that are coming on with higher pressure, if we tie them into this line, what's it going to do to the rest of the system? Is it going to pressure out some of the older wells? So there's a lot that goes into that. We compress the gas, and what are some reasons why we want to compress gas to move it through pipelines?
Transportation, you can transport more.
Yeah, you can transport more, right? So you can fit more in a smaller space, you can put in smaller pipes. So there's a lot of compression in our industry. And then usually that gas is going to come to a gas plant, and the type of gas plant you might build or the type of facilities you put in will depend a lot on, you know, that specific field where that natural gas is coming from. Natural gas compositions can vary a lot based on, you know, which basin they're coming from, which part of the country that gas is coming from. So we'll talk some more about that. So then at the gas plant, you separate liquids out of the natural gas stream, and the natural gas, we call it residue gas, will go into an interstate pipeline for distribution. And then the liquids, there's a variety of uses for the liquids. And then Dr. Baxter touched on this a little bit. So a lot of times the liquid stream coming out of the gas plant, where it's still mixed liquids, so propane, butanes, and heavier alkanes, we'll fractionate those, separate them into their individual components, and then they have a variety of uses. Usually it's the heavier components will go to refineries. A lot of it's used for feedstock to chemical plants. Propane, of course, has a lot of uses as a fuel. So anyway, there's sort of a snapshot of the industry.
Yeah, so multiple companies will tap into the same pipeline and we're getting the gas plant. So how do you differentiate between whose gas is yours?
Yeah, so that's a really good question, and it's exactly right. So, for example, one of our biggest areas where we operate, where I've done most of my work, is in Pinedale, Wyoming. So, sort of south of Yellowstone. It's a beautiful area. There's a lot of natural gas there, and you're right. So it's not just one company that owns, you know, that whole field and is drilling for gas there. You'll have a handful of companies. And then even within that, so you'll have a company that's operating, who's doing the drilling, but then a lot of times there's other companies that will invest. So most of the wells that come into our system, they're not 100% owned by one company. So Exxon or Chevron, Shell, Ultra, Anadarko, these companies that are some of the bigger companies that like to operate a lot of times. They usually don't own 100% of the gas coming out of that well. They'll have, you know, there might be 3 or 4 different companies that have different working interest percentages of that gas. So there's a lot of measurement that has to go on, and a lot of accounting for how we allocate sort of the gas and the liquid products that come out. So even within that field, you can have varying compositions. So we have technicians who will go out, they'll take samples, you know, from each well periodically, you know, maybe quarterly. They'll run that sample through a gas chromatograph and get the composition. And so it ends up just being a massive amount of data that comes into our system where we say, okay, here's, we've got measurement at each of these wells, it all comes together. So here's how much gas we have. And it's not just, so gas is sold not on a volume basis, but on an energy basis, so by BTU. But the composition matters because, you know, you could get to the same BTU value with, you know, different compositions of gas. And so then it all comes into our plant, and we'll have recovery percentages. So we'll say, okay, we removed 95% of the propane from the gas. So then we'll look back and say, okay, everybody, you get 95% of the propane that you delivered to us at this receipt point, at this receipt point. And so there's a lot of error that's built in just because there's so many data points. But it usually I think we're pretty good at it as an industry. We do have a term on their statements, there's lost and unaccounted for gas. And so sometimes I'll even have a gain. We'll say, okay, we added up, you know, 300 meters of wellhead gas, but then we have this 1 meter coming into our plant, and it's higher than the sum of all of these, so you get a little bit more than what we say you delivered to us at that point. Anyway, that's something I didn't deal much with in my engineering roles with the company, but in business development, I've dealt with that a lot more, because I interface with our customers a lot, so those are the types of things that they can get focused on, wanting to make sure they're treated fairly. I threw this slide in, just shows where the gas is. So some of the projects I've worked on, so in engineering, working for an operating company as opposed to like an engineering company, you know, we own and operate these assets, and I've enjoyed working for an operating company. So we have a lot of assets in the Rockies, like say Pinedale, Wyoming, is where a lot of our gas comes from. Also the Uinta Basin of Utah, out by Vernal. I made a lot of trips to Vernal in my day. And then in Louisiana, when I was part of QEP, when the Haynesville shale play was sort of exploding, I don't know, 2008, 2009 timeframe, QEP got big into Haynesville, and so I managed a project to build an amine plant in Louisiana. That was in 2010, and now I'm working Bakken. So Tesoro, before they bought us, they had these assets in the Bakken, and so that's where I'm working now. That's where the gas is. I always say, why can't we find gas in Hawaii and some locations that would be more fun for me to go visit in the field, but it's not the way it works. So you might have seen a slide like this before. This is from the EIA website. Dr. Baxter, I don't know if you use slides like this. So this one is total energy. So an overview of total energy. This one is just natural gas. Dr. Baxter, what time would you like me to finish?
So we usually take a break around the top of the hour for 3 or 4 minutes, and
Okay.
then the class goes till 9:40.
Okay, great. So natural gas in the U.S. now, on the previous slide, you can see this is in quadrillion BTUs, which is not a unit that I am very familiar with, but natural gas is at 28 quadrillion BTUs. Trillion cubic feet, now you're talking closer units that I use more often. So in the U.S., you can see that our total, those gross withdrawals, so 32.96, 33 trillion cubic feet of natural gas a year, which I think is a pretty staggering figure. When I first started working in these gas plants, so my company owns 5 or 6, maybe 7 natural gas processing plants. And our biggest one, we can do about 600 or 700 million standard cubic feet a day of natural gas. And for me, that number was just amazing to think that every day we're pulling that much gas, from under Pinedale, Wyoming, and it's, for years and years and years. And it's a pretty staggering figure. Now, a lot of that is that it's very pressurized, right? But still, it's an amazing amount of gas. So you can see from natural gas wells and from shale gas wells, adds up to about 25 trillion cubic feet per year. And then from crude oil wells, so like associated gas, is just over 6 trillion cubic feet. And so that's something in the Bakken, for example, and this is my first time really working in oil, but there is natural gas that comes out from those oil wells, right? And it's, you've probably seen stuff in the news, because those companies are just drilling for the oil, and the natural gas comes in such smaller amounts, it's really not economical for them to try to recover that natural gas, and so they want to just flare the gas, and so there's regulations in place that say they have to recover, or they can only flare up to a certain percentage. I think right now it's at 10%, but that's a target that's getting more and more strict as time goes on. So the companies in North Dakota, they don't want to sell this natural gas. It's not worth putting all the pipe in the ground and building the facilities to do it, but they're forced the first to do that. So that's a lot of this natural gas from crude oil wells. So then you come to your 33 trillion cubic feet, and then this shows where it goes. And I think some of these on top are interesting. So non-hydrocarbon gas is removed. So there's components in the natural gas that are not hydrocarbon, right? We'll talk about that in a bit. There's repressuring. So what do you think, what's that gas doing? Where they label it as repressuring.
Going into energy to pressurize the rest of it.
Yeah, so, yeah, exactly. So you're both right. It's being used by us as fuel in these compressors to recompress the rest of the gas, right? It's a pretty significant volume that gets used. Vented and flared. This one, NGPL, I don't know if you read the comments at the bottom, that's liquid, so gas, it was gas, but it becomes liquids in our processing facilities. Exports, additions to storage, and then you see the end uses, residential, commercial, industrial, transportation, and electric power. So, and I'm sure Dr. Baxter in this course gets into different energy and sort of the trends that are going on. I think from what I see, coal is still sort of on the decline as far as use for electric power. And I know Dr. Baxter has done a lot of work even in that industry trying to do carbon capture. There's big efforts to try to make coal cleaner, to make everything we do cleaner. A lot of the issues over the last several years, natural gas got so cheap that it was starting to compete with coal on a BTU basis. So if natural gas is as cheap as coal, that can start to become very challenging for coal. I threw this slide in yesterday, just showing natural gas net imports trend. So you can see we've been an importer of natural gas going back into the 70s, and that's looks like from this graph anyway, from the EIA website, that's right about now that trend is going to where we're going to be a net exporter of natural gas. Over the past few years, there have been some big LNG, liquefied natural gas projects approved and being built. So natural gas is so abundant that we are going to be exporting more and more, it looks like. So just some things for your information. If you haven't ever seen a drilling rig and what that looks like, there's a picture of a drilling rig. It's a pretty massive operation. And that side of the business, so not right now, but when I was part of QEP and Questar, we have affiliate companies who are exploration and production companies. And so in our investor presentations and presentations from senior management, we hear a lot about efficiency gains in our drilling. So they get very good at this. There's, you've heard a lot of stuff in the news about directional drilling and fracking. Now, fracking's been going on for decades. I remember now my former CEO, but I remember him making a comment that at the time he said, we frack every single well we drill, and we have for a lot of years. This isn't something that's brand new. But there have been a lot of improvements in fracking and in directional drilling that have driven down costs to drill for natural gas, and that's what led in a lot of ways to the commodity price declining so much. And then this is a picture of a site and how it gets left after the drilling rig leaves and they complete and frack all these wells. And so what we're left with is just basically stub outs where at one pad site, so at one site they'll have several wells, maybe 5 to 10 wells that all come, and that's where they're producing. So above ground, they all come to one point, or several wells come to one point. But underground, they might be going down 4,000 or 5,000 feet, and then turning and going horizontal, and so those wells are very spread out, but on the surface. Again, just stuff. If you haven't seen things like this before, I thought you might find interesting. So this we call a production type curve. So companies who are drilling for gas, they want to know what they're gonna get before they drill a well, so they'll do exploratory wells, they'll try to define their play. And then ideally, they wanna get it very defined to where they know, okay, we've got, 87 more wells to drill in this area, and here's how far we're gonna space them apart so we maximize how much gas we get for our money. But natural gas wells decline very quickly. So your initial production for this well, now I grabbed this from my company's investor presentation, so this is all public information. But your initial production might be 8,000 MCF per day, and an MCF is 1,000 standard cubic feet. But you see how quickly that declines. And so to keep it going, you have to keep drilling, each year. So we build a processing plant downstream of that. We don't want our processing plant inlet to have that same profile. They'll have a drilling program over many years where they're drilling a lot of wells to keep the total production constant. But if you didn't know, and you see similar type curves for oil wells as well. You get most of the production on the front end. If you have any questions as we're going along, don't hesitate to raise your hand and stop me. So again, something I grabbed from my old company's slide deck. So in Pinedale, Wyoming, each one of those red dots is a well that they have drilled, and they're sort of all these ones were sort of exploratory wells trying to define the play, and then once they feel like, okay, the science is pretty set, and they have a program, and it's just every year they have at 1.6 rigs drilling, and they can drill a well. I think they got down to like 10 or 11 days for one rig to drill one well. And so then the cost to drill that well is still a few $1 million that they're spending to drill that well. And they're just drilling out that field. This is a couple of years ago, they're quite a bit further north now, and they'll have this field completely drilled out in the next few years. Just to kind of give you a feel for how these fields are developed. Anyway, so now maybe more to the processing and the midstream business. Did you have a question? No? Okay. So what is natural gas? What are the compounds that make up natural gas? Right? What's the primary component? Is methane, right? And what is methane? CH4. What else? So when natural gas comes out of the ground, what other components are typically in it? Ethane, right? What else?
CO2.
Go down the line, right? So your alkanes, just going down the line, and that's right. Now, what might be a typical composition of propane? So what percentage of that stream do you think would be methane coming out of the ground? Any guesses? 90 plus? So that's a pretty good guess. I mean, depending on the play, it may be 90, in some cases lower, in some cases higher, but as an average, 90 is a pretty good number. So methane is the primary component of natural gas, and then, like I said, you have ethane, propane, butane, pentanes, all the way down, to C10, C11, and then what else? What else is in there?
Carbon dioxide.
Carbon dioxide, right? And what do you think might be how much carbon dioxide do you think might be in the gas? Trace amounts, few percent, what do you think?
2%.
2%? So 2% is actually, a lot of interstate pipelines have a spec of 2%. And so if you're above that, you may have to do some processing to remove carbon dioxide. If you're below it, you might not need to. It's something Dr. Baxter and I were just talking about the other day, though, is sometimes carbon dioxide, even if you meet the pipeline specs, say you're at 1.5% carbon dioxide, it prevents you from recovering as much of the other natural gas liquid components. And so sometimes you'll want to remove some carbon dioxide anyway, even if you meet the pipeline spec. What other components might be in it that you wouldn't want in there?
Would there be hydrogen sulfide in there?
Yeah, so sometimes there's hydrogen sulfide. Or H2S. If there's H2S present, we say it's sour gas, and I really haven't dealt with hydrogen sulfide, but I mean, it certainly does exist. And I think the process for removing it is the same, is I think the amine treating removes CO2 and H2S. And actually, the terminology I use to call it sour gas, people use the same terminology for CO2 being the gas.
Carbon monoxide?
Not typically, right? So carbon monoxide, when you combust natural gas, you'll get carbon dioxide and some carbon monoxide, but there's not normally carbon monoxide in the gas coming out of the ground.
What's the spec that you have for H2S? How low does it have to be on your class?
It's in the parts per million range.
About 2 parts per million.
It may be, I don't know off the top of my head, but it's a very small amount of H2S.
What about carbon dioxide keeps it from treating them as liquids? Like you treat more liquids as
Yeah, that's a really good question. So I don't know if y'all heard it. He said, what about carbon dioxide being in the gas keeps you from being able to recover more of the liquids? And I say liquids, those components they're a gas, they're in the gas phase, but then we recover them as liquids. And Dr. Baxter, you might be able to give a better answer than me, but simply it's freezing, right? So the way we process natural gas to recover these components is we get it really cold, and so we'll sort of push up against the point where we're going to freeze the carbon dioxide in our cryogenic processing facilities, and I'll get into more of the types of processing facilities that we have, but you know, there are some natural limitations, and I've seen where we operate close to that freeze point, and even to where we start to sort of see high differential pressures at the top of our tower, where we think, okay, we're forming dry ice, we're freezing carbon dioxide in our equipment. Right? So Dr. Baxter, you probably have a more technical answer about that would involve the word azeotropes.
Perfect answer.
Okay.
So how come you can't just freeze it, take out the dry ice, and then
So
go on?
I'm kind of
I mean, I
smirking
know
because
it's more
Dr.
complicated
Baxter,
than that,
you know,
but-
Dr. Baxter does research in that area, so he has good answers to that. I haven't seen in our industry, that's not common to purposely freeze the carbon dioxide as a way to recover it. But again, there's research to try to do just that, and Dr. Baxter can answer that a lot better than me. He can tell you. Okay, so I don't think anybody said water. So methane's the primary component. Water, typically the gas does come out of the ground, water saturated, and so usually the company, the exploration and production company, they'll do just a physical separation of water before we take custody. So they'll have a vessel where the water that's in the water phase will drop out. But we still have to do a lot of removing water. We call dehydrating the gas, and so there's two main ways we do that: glycol absorption and mole sieve adsorption. So I don't know how familiar you are with adsorption versus absorption. Probably somewhat. Are you all mostly juniors or seniors? Seniors mostly. Okay, so you know this stuff. But it's pretty interesting. So our adsorption towers, it's a vertical tower, and we have this mole sieve. I don't know if you've ever had a chance to see it. It just looks like little pieces of ceramic or something. And the science behind it's pretty cool, how that works, right? And essentially with adsorption, with mole sieve adsorption, we get the gas bone dry from water. So there's no water, essentially, which is important because of how cold we get it in cryogenic facilities. But if we're just going to do like a refrigeration facility where we're not getting as cold, so I should give numbers, I guess. So in our cryogenic facilities, we get to about -135 Fahrenheit, -135, -140. Propane refrigeration, we get to about -40 degrees. And for that, we do a glycol absorption. Pipeline specs about 5 pounds of water in a standard cubic feet. CO2 and H2S, oh, I bet the H2S number is probably about 4 parts per million. And then the ethanes, propanes, so those hydrocarbons, we recover those for 2 main reasons. The first one is to meet pipeline specifications. Why do you think they have pipeline specifications? That they don't want too rich of gas or too high of BTU content or too much propane or butane. Why would it be bad to have too much of it?
Well, it seems like you would optimize your turbine operation, your combustion system for a specific fuel
Right.
composition.
Right, so in your home, even your appliances, right, your natural gas fired heater in your home, yeah, I mean, it's designed for a specific range of BTU, right, which is typically lower than what it comes out of the well at. But they could adjust that, right? They could make it designed for a higher BTU gas. So why else might we want to?
The liquid molecules are worth a whole lot more money than the furnace.
Okay, so those are typically they're worth more money as liquids than they are just for their BTU value. So that's not always true though. Ethane, over the last several years, while I've been paying attention, ethane at one point was quite profitable, and now for the last I don't know, 3 or 4 years, it's hard to keep time straight, but ethane prices are actually negative. So a lot of our plants, we can operate them in, and I don't mean, when I say negative, we're not selling a gallon of ethane to you for like negative $1 or anything like that. But when I say negative, it's worth more with its BTU value. So it's worth more to sell it as a gas than a liquid. And there have even been times where propane has gone negative, where it's worth more for its BTU value. But typically, all of them, you know, if you look over the last 50 years, they're almost always worth more to sell as liquids. And I don't think that anything heavier than propane has ever been negative. So that's a big reason, right? We do it to make more money. We take those components out. Any other guesses why?
It seems like you would put propane into your house, you can have a fire hazard.
Yeah.
There's a lot of energy for.
Yeah, so it's dangerous in the sense that we process these in a gas processing plant, but there's also just, if these are traveling through a pipeline and they might go over a range of pressures, and could be some natural cooling that takes place, right, as they're being transported underground. There's, some of these components would naturally fall out, and so you could have, you don't want any liquid hydrocarbons going to your appliance. It would get your attention really fast. I've seen it, well, I haven't seen it in person, I've seen the results of it from some of our flares where we have accidentally had liquids in the gas or even liquids come out of our flares, and it's not pretty. So we want gas to be gas and liquids to be liquids. So those are the main reasons why we process those components out. Go ahead.
I just have a quick question. You said the pressure varies in these pipelines, but about what pressure range should we operate?
So, like in the interstate pipeline?
Yeah.
So maybe I'll go pressures through the system real quick, and then I'm gonna run out of time for sure. So in our gathering systems, producers like us to suck the pressure down low because they get higher production, right? If the field pressure is at 1,000 pounds, well then the developed back pressure, you know, their wellhead pressure might be 1,400 pounds. Versus if we suck that down and that field pressure is 100 pounds, you know, they're going to be able to flow more natural gas. So that's a reason why we'll have field compression to suck those pressures down for them. Our gas plants typically will have pressures of, say, like inlet pressures of 1,000 to 1,100 psig, and that's a typical pressure for an interstate pipeline, 800 to 1,400 pounds. It's a pretty good number. Should we take a quick break and then come back? Startup, when you're starting up for a couple weeks, you'd be out there, maybe not full time, but at least half of the time. So it's like 2010 was not my favorite year for work. I spent too much time in Louisiana.
So you said you use propane refrigeration usually for refrigeration plants. Do you use like the methane or that ethane for the cryo plants, or how do you do the
Okay,
refrigeration for cryo?
perfect. So let's get right to what I want to talk to, kind of the heart of the matter of natural gas processing. So natural gas processing is really pretty simple. You get the gas cold, right? It's just thermodynamics. You want these components to drop out as liquids, so you get the gas cold. And there's a few ways you do that. So a JT plant, JT stands for Joule Thomson. Anybody want to dazzle us all and tell us what the Joule Thomson effect is? Anybody want to take a shot at that? So it's a simple expansion. There you go. I didn't know that when I graduated from BYU, but I probably did at one point for a test and then immediately got it right. But the Joule Thomson effect is you do a simple expansion. And how do you do a simple expansion? Nozzle valve, right? So across a valve. You take a pressure drop across a valve and it gets colder. So, yeah, I mean, there's lots of examples I can give of that. Of you drop pressure across a valve. I don't know if you've ever had like a gas canister, even like an aerosol spray, and you spray it for a while. What happens? It gets cold, right? It's taking an expansion, and so that's the JT effect. And so we have plants that's sort of the heart of the processing. We have one little valve there where you take that pressure drop and it gets cold, and then you have a big plant for all the other stuff that happens in separations, separating the components. But that's the heart of it. That's how you're getting it cold, is by doing a simple expansion. And so that's, I would say that's the simplest processing that we do. We don't do much of that because it's usually worth it to spend a lot more money to build a refrigeration plant or even a cryo plant to recover more of those products. So the next step up, I would say, is refrigeration plant. So a refrigeration plant, we use propane refrigeration. And I was prepared to maybe do a little more than what I'm going to have time to do to talk about refrigeration. But we use propane, and the reason we like to use propane is because we have it, right? I mean, that's one of the reasons, is we make our own refrigerant, so it's really easy to make it up when we need to. And propane works really well as a refrigerant in natural gas processing. Propane, if you, well, with propane refrigeration, we get to about -40 degrees Fahrenheit. That's, yeah, at atmospheric pressure, that's the flash point of propane. I think it's like -44 degrees Fahrenheit. And then cryogenic plants, actually, Dr. Baxter, I didn't totally understand what he had up at the front of the starter class. To me, it looked like a turbo expander, right? So it's maybe a little different application of the same technology, which is what makes cryogenic processing possible. And I think that really developed like around the 1950s, maybe early 60s is where that technology developed. So with so you have a so this would be your compressor side, right? And this is your expander side. So we call this a turbo expander. And this is the technology behind cryogenic processing. You'll have your gas come in to the expander side of the turbo expander, right? And it's doing an expansion as it goes across, like not a mechanical engineer, but like it expands, it hits the rotors and stators, and you get the energy out that way. So your gas goes through there. That powers a shaft that's physically connected to a compressor. So the same stream, it does some other stuff first, but then it comes in here, and you're using that energy to compress that same gas. It comes in and gets compressed, and that turns out to be a much more efficient way to take an expansion than the Joule-Thomson expansion. And we get into a little bit more of the science behind that. But those are the three main ways of processing, the three main types of processing plants we have. And we have all three. We have Joule-Thomson plants, refrigeration plants, and cryogenic plants. And again, JT plants and refrigeration, JT might get to minus 20 to 30 degrees Fahrenheit. Propane, refrigeration minus 40, cryo minus 135-ish. Dr. Baxter mentioned a term, cricondotherm, which, if you take that packet that I handed to you, if you look at, turn towards the back of it, I put in a pH diagram, pressure entropy diagram for propane is the last one, and methane is the second to last one. So, probably a PT, pressure temperature diagram's a little better. So, your phase envelope for natural gas, it would sort of look like that. So this is your phase envelope. So what is, this is the bubble point then, correct? And this is dew point. You guys know this stuff a lot better than me. So let's say you have, this is mostly methane, but other components in there that make up this phase envelope. So let's say you're at 1,000 pounds here, and you're completely a gas, right? You're not 100% gas, and you start dropping your pressure until you get to here, and then what happens, right? As you keep expanding, you're separating into liquid and gas, and so
Yeah.
Started.
Then as you start expanding, it expands into a gas.
But right here, typically that's what you would expect. As you expand the liquid, it should become a gas. But here, there's a term for this. Sorry, guys,
supercritical.
it's called, I used to be an engineer here, retrograde condensation, right? Thanks. I'm making it through here. So you actually you go from a gas, and you actually do start to drop out liquid as you're doing an expansion, which is counterintuitive. That's not normally what you would expect. And so that can be a problem in natural gas processing, where you have, you can be sending a gas stream to an interstate pipeline, but then if their pressure drops, which it will, right, throughout their, as it, pressure is the driving force in that pipeline, as the pressure drops, you could condense liquids. And so these pipelines, one of the specs they have, besides 4 parts per million H2S, 2% CO2, they'll have a cricondotherm spec. So cricondotherm, and
most of our operators, even some of our engineers probably don't know that term very well. They'll just say dew point spec, but technically it's a Criconomy spec. It's not a dew point spec. So a typical pipeline spec would be like a 15-degree Fahrenheit Criconomy spec. So that means the Criconomy is essentially, at this point, it's the, I wrote down a definition because I knew I wouldn't be able to get it just right. It's the maximum temperature above which liquid cannot be formed regardless of pressure. I can say that again if you want. But essentially, so this, if you ask me what's the Criconomy temperature of this composition, the composition of gas that made up this phase envelope, it's going to be this temperature right here. Because what that means is, regardless of pressure, regardless of what the pressure is, if this is 15 degrees Fahrenheit, regardless of pressure, I can never form liquids, right, if I'm above 15 degrees Fahrenheit. And so a lot of times people will kind of confuse that with dew point, but the reason why it's different from dew point is I could process gas in my refrigeration plant, or let's say I do a JT plant, and I'm only getting my gas to 0 degrees Fahrenheit. Well, it's possible to have a 0 degrees Fahrenheit dew point, but have a Criconomy that's higher than that. And so that becomes a problem in the pipeline, right? So that's probably confuse you a little bit with this.
No, so I'm guessing then the pipelines design everything to make sure that it's always above 15 degrees, and that's why it's at that.
Exactly. So that's where that comes into play.
So that really ugly word, I think it's an ugly word. It's helpful if you know where it says the critical condensation, and then instead of saying temperature, they say therm, all right? So that's, if that helps you remember the word. There's also a Cricon bar, which is a critical condensation pressure, so which is at the top of that.
Okay. Hopefully that makes a little bit of sense to you. So I want to show you a couple pictures. Here's a picture. I think it's one of my companies. Now this is a GPA presentation slide. So there's some field compressors. Those are reciprocating compressors. Compressors are typically the most expensive parts of our plants, right? This actually is a picture. I don't know if I took it, but I installed that compressor. So this is a turbine compressor made by a company called Solar Turbines. That piece of equipment that you're looking at, that cost about $6.5 million just for the compressor itself. But then the facility that we built, with everything that comes with it, and this is just a compressor station, no processing. It was about a $23 million facility, and there's the facility. So this is I don't know, like 30 miles south of Vernal, Utah. Anyway, that's just a compressor facility. We spend a lot of money. Our processing plants, I don't think I have a good picture of, well, there's not one of ours, but there's a generic natural gas plant, which looks like there's some piping not attached, so that maybe it's not operational. But a processing plant, for a facility that can process, say, 150 million standard cubic feet a day, you're probably looking at over $100 million to build a facility. So, I mean, it's pretty capital intensive, and just because the equipment's very expensive, the piping's very expensive, and a lot of that is compressors. Pipeline construction. So 9:40, is that the time? Okay. So I want to spend a couple minutes talking about the scholarship, just to give you some insight on that. So again, I strongly encourage you to apply for the scholarship. And then just a few comments. Would you mind handing your scholarship packet there? So just a few tips for you on filling out this application. So if you look at it, your name, phone number, information about yourself. They ask for your major GPA and your overall GPA. Okay, they list professional societies and other organizations in which you participate. I realize that you're students and you might sometimes feel like, oh, I don't have this awesome resume. But that's to be expected. But hopefully you're participating in things like AICHE or different societies that you could list there. Don't leave any of these blank, because the way we do this, we score them, and so they'll have a grading system that'll be like 0 to 5 on each of these. If you leave something blank, it's a 0, and it's that's not going to help you out. So just list what you can. Try to keep it relevant, as much as you can. You don't need to say that you're part of the winning intramural flag football team. They don't really care that much.
Is this the actual application that we thought, or is it an online?
This is the application. I can email it to Dr. Baxter, and I assume he can email that out to you all easily. So you'll have the Word file.
Okay, and because on here it says that you turned it in via email, correct?
Yeah. So some people will like send it as a PDF file, or some people will have it, the native file. Either way is fine.
Okay.
No difference to us. Okay. Extracurricular activities in which you're involved. Any co-op or intern experience you've gained. Some of you have probably done some pretty good internships that are related to this industry, and that's awesome. Make sure you put some good stuff in there. Don't just list ExxonMobil company, summer of 2014. List it, but then also give a little details about what you did. Try to fill it up a little bit more. Even if you haven't done a formal internship, if you've done some research with a professor or something, just list that here. The more you can put there, the better, and make it as relevant as it is to our industry, which it doesn't. You don't have to have worked in a natural gas processing plant. Probably not very many of you have done that. But the applicable experience you do have, really expound upon it, and that will help you out. How's your college tuition being financed? I think a few years ago I used to feel like, man, these students are just whining. I mean, I paid for my own way through college, and I don't want to hear your sob story, but I think some of the other people who grade these maybe like that more than I do. So definitely, I'm not saying try to make us cry or anything, but definitely, if you're helping your way through college, don't just put mom and dad are paying for college. If you're helping out, definitely emphasize the sacrifices that you're making to pay for your college. And then the last thing, which is the main thing that we use to differentiate students, is the essay that you'll write. Sorry, actually there's one, 100 words or less. Why have you chosen to pursue an engineering degree? But then on the back of that, it's a brief essay in 1,000 words or less describing your interest in the industry. Something, if you can be a little bit personable, talk about experiences you've had that make you interested in this industry. If you have some relevant work experience at all, those types of things can be really helpful. Show that you have a little bit of knowledge about the industry and that you really are interested in it, and you'll do pretty well. Like I say, I've usually been pretty impressed with the essays that come from UNE students. So put a little time into it. I know you have a lot going on. Obviously, you're busier as students than I am. I guess I'm busier with kids and being a scoutmaster than you guys are. But I know you're really busy with school. It's a lot more than a full-time job. But take a few hours, crank out this essay, get these applications in. Some of you are going to get some money out of this, and so I strongly encourage you to do it if you can find the time. Okay, so that's what I wanted to say about that. And so maybe with the rest of the time, any questions you have would be great. If you have questions about what it might be like working in industry, I'm happy to answer those. If there's no questions, I have some other things I can talk about too.
I have a question about the scholarship.
Yeah.
So the majority of us are seniors in here and we graduate next semester.
Right.
So how does that affect the scholarship? I mean,
So that's the prime group that we want to award these to, seniors or juniors. So yeah, that's who we're targeting. People who are looking for jobs, graduating in April.
Okay.
Does that mean it'll be for next semester, or?
So the way it works, when we award these scholarships, they might send them to you. I think last year they didn't let me bring them. I like to hand deliver them. But the way it works is there will be a check written out to you and to BYU. And so you can't just take it to the bank and cash it, but you take it to the administration office, and they will credit it to your account, to your BYU account. And the way I understand it is if you have a balance, you know, if you've already paid tuition or whatever, they'll cut you a check, they'll credit that back. But if, when you get that check, you know, a month from now, it's immediately available to you, to your student account.
I was just gonna ask about the job prospects right now.
Yeah.
What's the industry look like?
It's probably not great, right? Yeah, I don't know, you guys might know better than me, just from the recruiting efforts on campus and how companies are approaching it. You know, the industry's down, it's probably better than it was a few years ago, but you might have to get pretty aggressive to find a good job. So exploration and production companies, there's been a lot of layoffs, and those are our customers. So we've seen a lot of layoffs over the past few years. I've never been part of a company that's done layoffs. I think I'm kind of lucky with that. So I would say the midstream sector is sort of probably doing a little bit better than the upstream. But I mean, commodity prices hit the bottom, right? Oil hit like $26, and it's now up, you know, 45 to 50 range. And so I think a lot of what I see with our customers is that they're sort of cautiously optimistic, which means they probably aren't starting a really robust hiring you know, program. But I think, like I said, it's probably better than it was a few years ago. And if you hit it pretty hard, hopefully you'll be able to find something good. Your first job might not be your dream job, but it'll lead to better stuff. Any other questions? Okay, so one thing I thought as I'm preparing for this is I thought, you know, what do I know now about what it's like working in industry that I didn't know as a student? And I remember specific conversations, you know, and you know, some classmates who were wanting to go in the semiconductor industry and saying how, oh, I'd hate to go work, you know, for an oil company, and, you know, there's no innovation there, it's all, everything is known, whereas semiconductors, it's a lot more cutting edge, and that's probably, I'm sure there's truth in that. I certainly don't think my job's been boring. It's pushed me pretty hard. I mean, I feel like, especially early on, I feel like I got thrown into situations where I was like, I don't know, you know, I thought a compressor looked like that. And now I'm responsible for a pretty big project to install a compressor. And you know, you keep learning after college. Employers don't expect you to come in day one and know everything. You'll be mentored. There'll be engineers who have a lot of experience, and you know, coming out of school, they know that you're smart and that you have a lot of these fundamentals, but you know, you still have a lot to learn. That's fine. I mean, that's a good thing. You want to keep learning and keep challenging yourselves. A lot of the types of projects you might be asked to do. There's a lot of safety in our industry, which, you know, don't be turned off by that. Safety is very technical and challenging as well. It's not just about telling people to wear steel-toed shoes and hard hats. There's a lot of process safety that's really interesting. In our processing plants, OSHA mandates that we do process hazard analyses every 5 years, and it's a pretty tedious process, but you go through and you evaluate every part of your plant and look for what could fail. The Celanese plant that I worked at right out of school, back in the late 70s, they had a major safety incident. They blew up about half of the plant and killed a few people, and so safety is really important. And that's actually a pretty interesting case of how that happened. There's a few small failures, and it, you know, it sort of comes together, and an incident happens like that. And engineers, a lot of our jobs are to make these facilities safe, and so that our operators out there go home alive. And we do our best job, and still there's things that happen. I mean, for a while, one of my responsibilities was sort of doing incident investigations and putting out incident investigation reports when they would happen. And we had one that it was a near catastrophe that would have killed a couple people and blown up our flagship plant. And I looked at it and I'm like, man, that is the smallest little thing, you know, a little piece of tubing that wasn't installed properly, and how do you detect that? I mean, safety is really important. So a lot of what you'll do, we'll be doing those types of studies and evaluations. A lot of those studies and evaluations, we say, okay, what could go wrong, and then what would be the result? And then we'll have like pressure relief valves. So a lot of you will spend time running through those scenarios and then calculating, okay, let's say we have a fire under this vessel, you know, what's the most amount of fluid you could have to relieve very quickly to keep this from exploding? So there's things like that. One of the interesting things that I got to do really early on with Questar, we still have a refrigeration plant out near Vernal, Utah, and we wanted to expand it. And so we hired an engineering company, and they said the compressors, the propane compressors, which is the most expensive part of the process, they said you have more than enough compression. So this isn't going to be too expensive, and we can take this from a 180 million standard cubic feet a day plant up to like 240, I can't remember what the number was we were shooting for. And they said, you're not going to have to put in any more compressors. And so we're going down this path thinking, okay, this is going to be a great project. And we were doing a design review, and our head, the plant manager, who's an operator out there, he said, what do you mean we have enough compression to do this expansion? We don't have enough compression now. And so my boss, at the time, he had a lot of faith in that engineering contractor, and he said to me, basically, go figure out what they're doing wrong. They obviously don't know how to run their compressors, or you know, they're not. Something's not right. They don't understand, because we're pretty sure we do have plenty of compression. So that's what my task was to go figure this out. So you know, I learned the refrigeration cycle in school. I was 2 years out of school at this point. And so this packet that I gave you, it's Section 14 refrigeration. This is from the Gas Processors Association, who I'm representing today. They put out these engineering data books. These are specific to our industry. So there's a chapter on compression, there's a chapter on dehydration, a chapter on refrigeration, is the one you've got now. And so I basically took this out to the plant with me and you know, drew a process flow diagram and went about figuring this out. You know, what's wrong here? Why do our operators think we don't have enough compression when we think that we probably do? And I learned a lot through that exercise. You know, you take something that you learned in school and it's very theoretical, and you can run some calculations on how much work is required, and it becomes very real life as you're walking through a plant that has, you know, these processes. If you look at on page 14-2, you know, you have the equipment, which I'm looking at in real life, and then your pH diagram, and you're looking at, okay, once I figured out we were already compression limited. So, but it just becomes so much more real life when you say, well, what determines this pressure PA that depends completely on your temperature for condensing the gas when it comes out of the compressor. And you realize, well, okay, there's a big difference summer to winter. So you have more than enough compression in the winter time, but in the summertime, and you're condensing it by blowing air on it, you know, it's just going through some fans. And so that determines what that discharge pressure is. So it becomes very real life when you say, well, there's a natural limitation, and then you start brainstorming, well, what are some ways we can get more out of this equipment? Well, we could put an evaporative air cooler on that condenser. That's one way you could do it. So instead of, you know, when it's 100 degrees out, you're getting your propane to 110, you know, it's pretty dry there, and you get a lot of bang for your buck out of an evaporative air cooler, and now you're cooling it down to 75 or 80 degrees. And different options, kind of like that. So anyway, I ran out of time, but hopefully you have a little bit